Well, Rhodesia, as you may know from history, was the discovery of the possibly not so great Cecil John Rhodes, who was carving empire down the spine of Africa at the
Yeah.
behest of Victoriana. So the great Victorian era, he was really one of those masons, midnight masons, who was carving that straight line down Africa on behalf of the De Beers and the Oppenheimers and the rest of them. So um, the ultimate conquest was Rhodesia, which he founded and then was named after him, which is a small landlocked country, but without any doubt, the most beautiful country on earth.
Wow.
All explorers said that back in the day,
Wow.
Stanley Livingstone, all of them, they all said, wow, well, this is it. This is God's country. But incredibly rich in resources, coal and diamonds and gold and all the rest of it. So Rhodesia was really the conquest of the British Empire. And then in 1965, before I was born, the Rhodesians, the small white Rhodesian population, declared independence against the crown, showing real, predictive verve. We were ahead of the time,
Hmm.
wanting to secede from the crown of England and all that bullshit. And we did, and we pulled out our guns and told the crown to back off, which it had no choice. And of course, that led to becoming enmatized by the globalists. So
Yeah.
Rhodesia became sanctioned by the entire global community, which was driven by the Crown of England, still is to this day. And we ended up having to circle the wagons and defend our lives. We had very small population. Um, and the Rhodesia became the kind of checkerboard of the Cold War in Africa, those big forces playing out to try to gain dominion over Africa, because Rhodesia was the wellspring of the wealth of Africa in a sense. And that was I was born into that in the war and lived throughout that, and living behind grenade screens and traveling in convoys, and that was my life, my childhood. And at the end of it, we couldn't sustain beyond a certain point, and we had to cave, and the globalists won, I guess. And Robert Mugabe came in, and we all know about Robert Mugabe. So Rhodesia turned from being the richest country possibly on earth for GDP to the poorest country on earth, which is why the Zimbabwe, it was then turned into Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe and the Zim note, as we all know, is the most devalued currency on the face of the earth. So there's a nice bit of counterpoint geometry playing out there.
And
But the
you're,
resurrection,
yeah,
the
really
resurrection
quick. Why do you think the globalists are so interested in Africa and keeping it impoverished?
for a host of reasons which tiptoe into the esoteric. So I'll go there without
Hmm.
apology. In the first instance, Africa is a lot bigger than you think Africa is. So if you went to school anywhere in the world between now and between 1950 up until 1952, the real history of the world was more or less available. But it became something which was impossible. Forgive me, I'm just going to change the angle of light. I've got sun in my eyes.
Of course.
1952, the British installed a software which desecrated the true history of the world. And that installation of the British curriculum worldwide has really ended our true capacity to know the truth about who we are, what we were, north, south, east, west. I'll tell you that Africa is a vast continent, at least 3 times bigger than you think it is. So you have to look at the Mercator map and understand how mapping was done back in the day. But the map that you look at and the children look at in the classroom bears no relationship to it proportionately to the size of Africa compared to America, Canada, the rest of the world. You can fit the whole of China, North America, Europe into Africa. It is a
Hmm.
vast continent in real scale, real time. So you're talking about, in a sense, the biggest reserve of natural resources, minerals, gold, diamonds, everything you can shake a stick at. And that, of course, has always been the essential pillar upon which any economy stands. So that's the answer to you. If owning Africa, owning the mining rights, owning the land, being able to collateralize Africa into bonds, human souls, Africans themselves and their land, through tabulations and registrations, that becomes a massive underpinning of this false light global economy.
I'd like to jump in.
there now.
Go ahead, John.
Isn't China trying to
Well, so China began when I was doing my diplomatic work over 2 decades ago in Africa, because I left Africa at 16 or 17, was essentially a refugee for about 9 or 10 years, till I was finally granted a passport by the British. But I went back in 1999. I went back and started living in Morocco when I retired, when I was ejected from the music industry because I wouldn't sign the contract. I went back to Africa, to Morocco and Egypt, and lived between Morocco and Egypt for about 3 years, and started my peace foundation, Humanitad. And so I was doing some high-end, I say high-end, meaning to say high access. I was able to access leadership at that time, and as I still do today. But I spent 5 or 6 years doing diplomacy work, going around meeting with leaders. And I'll tell you what, in Africa, at that time, 1999, I was sitting down with plenipotentiaries and ambassadors and some of the African leaders. And they were saying, my God, China's just coming and knocking on the door and offering us $1 billion, $1 billion, $1 billion. So back in the day, that was really cheap. China was super smart. So 20 plus years ago, China went in with a small budget of, 50B, 100B, and bought out Africa when it was absolutely bankrupted, and picked up the concessions, the infrastructural concessions to build bridges and roads and infrastructure, which the net is that Africa feeds China. So it was a very smart trade-off that was done over 20 years ago. Be sure about that.
Oh, they're very strategic.
Yes.
They're getting their pillars in everywhere.
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah,
I'm curious.
let me just say something that I have to do on a point of honor.
Yeah.
Every time China gets raised, on a point of honor, I have got to say a couple of things. One, China today is the construct, the devise of Wall Street, which is to say the Crown of England and the Vatican. So be clear about that. We want to shake a finger at China, the Communist Party. We invented it. We created it. We installed that godless software. We financed with our tax dollars, our grandparents financed Trotsky, Marx, and Stalin, and the Stalin purges and the massacres that came. We are entirely responsible for toppling the Romanov dynasty back in the day, the turn of last century, arguably the most noble bloodline in the history of the world. We toppled that. The Khazarian mob, the mafia behind the Federal Reserve, were entirely responsible. But that's to say, we, the taxpayers in the enlightened West, were the ones who created Chinese Communist Party, and we created the Soviet Union and the communist threat that came out of Russia. So all of that stuff we're accountable for. And until we make amends with that psycho-intellectually and psycho-culturally, make amends with the fact that it was our forebears, white skins principally in North America and the Commonwealth countries, who were entirely responsible for the abomination that we now see as being the big threat. We designed it.
Hey, if you like these kind of conversations and you'd like to see more, click like and subscribe to our channel. And if you're at the computer and you'd like to hear the whole podcast, click right here.